Peace, family. The title of this video is The Hood. Should we be teaching our children to get out of the hood? About a year ago, myself and my people put out a meme, and it read something like this. New rules. It's no longer about getting out of the hood. It's about buying up the hood and making it a decent place to live. Now, I created a lot of controversy with that statement, and the statement was based in a teaching by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that states and commands that we make our own communities a decent place to live. Now let me first start off by saying that the hood is not a place. The hood is a mentality. And if you take the mentality from point A to point B, then what was the hood at point A becomes the hood at point B. Why? Because the people who live there now affect the environment. See, it's the mentality, not necessarily the location. So I think when we talk about the hood, we have to be able to put it in context, because you can live in the hood but not necessarily live like the hood. Now, when Abraham Lincoln signed what was called the Emancipation Proclamation, and blacks were quote unquote freed from slavery, you have to understand that our bodies may have been emancipated, but our minds were still incarcerated with a slave mentality. And so at that point, we were emancipated, but segregation was as real as it ever was. So white people, Caucasian people, did not want black people living in their communities. So we settled in small towns, and we built one home, and we all lived together. And we built another home, and we sharecropped one with another. We grew our own food. Next thing you know, that home turned into a small neighborhood, and that neighborhood turned into a community. And then we realized, man, we need water. We need government. So we started electing our own elected officials. We had our own police force. Go and do your research. They were called black towns, and there were dozens of them across the United States of America that came up organically. Why? Because we were forced to create our own, because white people did not want to live among us. But when Lyndon Baines Johnson, with Dr. King looking over his shoulder, signed civil rights legislation that said, you know what, you can go and live wherever you want, then we abandoned the black towns, abandoned our properties, and we moved into the inner city. But the problem with that was, when we moved into the inner city, even though Washington, D.C. said that it was okay for us to move into the white neighborhoods, they obviously didn't check with the white neighbors who still did not want us there. So by the time you got to your new home in the inner city and you jumped the fence to go knock on the door and greet your white neighbor, he or she was already gone because they saw you coming. So then you had an influx of blacks moving from black towns into the inner city. So neighborhoods like 5th Ward, neighborhoods like 3rd Ward, neighborhoods like 4th Ward, which was once called Freedmanstown, were occupied by black people. But then white people decided we don't want to live among them, so they moved out into the outskirts. What did we do? We followed them. And when we followed them to the outskirts, they moved into the suburbs. Then what did we do? We moved from the outskirts to the suburbs, and we kept following them until they got tired of running. And when they got tired of running, they busted a U-turn, came back into the inner city, and now we're complaining about this thing called gentrification, which in essence is white people reclaiming the neighborhoods that were once theirs before we moved from the black towns into the city. Now, I know that was long, but you gotta understand exactly what I'm saying. See, I grew up in the inner city. I was taught all my life to get out of the hood. Get out. If you still live in this community, then that didn't represent success. But now we drive through inner city communities and we see 3- and 4-story townhomes in the same community that we were taught to get out of. You see millions of dollars in renovations in city parks in the very community that we were taught to get out of. So I asked myself the question, and I started asking the community, are we doing our children a disservice by telling them to get out of the hood? Because it appears as if though while we're teaching our children to get out of the hood, white people were teaching their children on how to come and take it back. I hope I'm making sense. So it's no longer enough to teach your children get out the hood. I tell young people all the time, when you drive down that main street in your community and you see that abandoned building, see, you see an eyesore, but a developer can drive down that same street and he sees that same building and he sees a 3-story townhome. He sees a juice bar. He looks at that empty lot and he sees opportunity where you and I see adversity. No, it's not about getting out the hood anymore. Listen, let me ask you a question. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? Because if you don't change your mentality first, wherever you go, you will turn it into the hood. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we have to first work on the way that we think. And then once we begin to repair the way we think, then we begin to see the hood differently. See, there's a story of a beggar who sat on the corner on a cardboard box. Excuse me, I get excited sometimes. And every passerby that came along, he begged that passerby for money to get a loaf of bread. Excuse me, could you please give me a nickel so I can get a loaf of bread? And one day a wise man came along and he said, son, I don't have a nickel to give you for a loaf of bread. He said, but that's an interesting box that you're sitting on. What are you sitting on? And he said, get up. So the beggar got up and the wise man turned over the box, opened it up, and it was a box full of bread. The man was sitting on the very thing that he was begging for. What am I saying? I'm saying that we must have honor, love, and respect for our own community. It should not take for others to see value in what we have before we decide that we want to fight for it. We have a gold mine at our feet if we would but just think a little bit differently about our community. See, the definition of a bad neighborhood is a neighborhood where the good people won't do anything about its problems. Everybody has problems in every neighborhood. But when we sit around and we do nothing about it, then the neighborhood deteriorates. And then we say, you know what? We want to move. Now, it's not always about moving. It's about us coming together, pooling our resources and solving the problems. So I want to encourage everybody within earshot to take a second look at what it is that's underneath your feet. It may be more valuable than you think it is. And stop telling your children to get out of the hood. But teach your children to get out of a hood mentality and to make their own community a decent place to live. Peace.